Hello again. I'm not infrequently accused of being very cunning and duplicitous about which crimes I mention on this channel, and the suggestion has more than once been made that I cherry pick cases which support my own racist point of view, while ignoring anything which doesn't fit my artfully constructed and deliberately misleading narrative. This is a reasonable accusation, and if those making it could only stick to that single point rather than larding their objection to a lot of personal abuse, it might be possible to discuss this idea in a rational way. Today I thought I would look briefly at the government's own statistics. I begin with something which is truly shocking. That is that half of all 15 to 17-year-old homicide victims in the whole of England and Wales are black. Since black people make up just 3 or 4% of this age group, that must mean that black teenagers of that age are 12 times as likely to be murdered as white ones. Not London mark you or any other carefully chosen area, but England and Wales as a whole. Of course, it could be that these young people are victims of racially motivated attacks by white supremacists or angry racist police officers. But that isn't the case at all. Almost without exception, these teenagers are killed by other black people. This is disturbing and seldom talked about, that people of African heritage in this country are killing each other at a fairly brisk rate. This does rather raise questions about the concept of Black Lives Matter and the way in which this is used sometimes as a reproach to white people. Of course, some of the stuff in the statistics, to which I give a link in the description to this video, are open to the interpretation that racism does indeed play a part. For example, the percentage of black people who are arrested, stopped and searched by the police and so on tends to be higher than for white people. And the same thing goes for stuff like the chances of being remanded in custody by a judge and so on. I think that I've mentioned before that I've written quite a lot about murders, at least half a dozen books on the subject. Fashions in murder change over time and they also vary by ethnicity, which I find fascinating. For example, for white people in this country, murder has always traditionally been a domestic crime. It takes place indoors between people who know each other or are related. This is still the case, it's always been the case. About 56% of murdered white people die indoors or in their gardens. Fewer than 20% are killed in the street. By contrast, almost half of black homicide victims do die in the street. Then too, there are murders involving stabbing and slashing. 70% of black victims die in this way, but only half as many white homicide victims die like that. It appears that black homicides, as I suspected before I looked at the figures, tend to take place in the streets and involve knives. Of course, 100 years ago, the white British people were very keen on that sort of thing. Cutthroat razors were really popular for murder because they were ready to hand in most homes. Of course, this is just homicide. Taken overall, with all offences, about 75% of crimes are committed by white people, as one would expect statistically. As I've remarked also, some crimes, burglary for instance, are almost exclusively committed by young white men. What I find fascinating here is that young black men do seem to be killing each other at a great rate, and anybody who is really concerned about black lives would probably be well advised to ask why this is the case, rather than protesting in the streets about the very occasional death of a black person at the hands of the police. Those sort of things are vanishingly rare, but always bring out the crowds. If I was a black person, I would be asking myself why my community is tearing itself apart in this way, with young men killing each other in the streets at 12 times the rate of other ethnicities.